Have you ever wondered why the universe seems to delay the very thing you want most? Why doors don't just stay closed, but close right when you reach for them? Think about it for a moment. Not the small delays, the big ones. The kind that feel personal. The kind that isolate you. The kind that make you ask, late at night, in the quiet space between thoughts, what did I do wrong? Maybe you lost momentum when everything was finally making sense. Maybe the relationship faded just as you opened your heart. Maybe the opportunity vanished after you sacrificed everything to be ready for it. And what hurts the most is not the delay itself, it's the silence that follows. No explanation, no sign, no reassurance, just space, just waiting, just you. But here is the unsettling question no one asks out loud. What if the universe is most precise exactly in the delays you hate the most? Imagine standing in the dark, unable to see more than one step ahead. Your instinct screams to move forward, to do something, to escape the stillness. Yet something unseen holds you there, not violently, not cruelly, but firmly, like a hand on your chest saying, "Not yet." This is where most people break. They assume abandonment. They assume failure. They assume they've been forgotten. But ancient wisdom, hidden psychology, and deep spiritual laws suggest something far more disturbing and far more hopeful. There are moments when progress would actually destroy you. Moments when speed would disconnect you from who you are becoming. Moments when the universe delays not to punish, but to rearrange you internally before allowing you to step forward. If you've ever felt isolated during a delay, if you've ever felt cut off while everyone else moved ahead, if you've ever sensed that something invisible was happening inside you while nothing moved outside, then this message isn't random. It's not entertainment. It's recognition. And if this resonates, if your body feels it before your mind understands it, consider subscribing. Not as a habit, but as a signal that you're ready to listen differently. Because what looks like a pause on the surface may be the most intense movement you've ever experienced beneath it. And once you understand why the universe creates these delays, you'll never experience waiting the same way again. There are moments in life when nothing obvious is happening, yet everything inside you feels unusually loud. You wake up from a dream that feels more real than your waking life. Not dramatic, just charged. A place you don't recognize, a conversation that lingers all day, a symbol you can't explain, but can't forget either. You brush it off at first, until it happens again. Or maybe it's not dreams, maybe it's your body. A sudden tightness in your chest for no medical reason, a deep exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix, a strange pressure behind your eyes when you sit in silence, moments when your heart races, not from fear, but from something you can't name. And then there are the thoughts. Not anxiety exactly, more like downloads, insights that arrive fully formed, questions that interrupt your routine. Why am I really here? Why doesn't my old life fit anymore? Why does moving forward suddenly feel wrong? These experiences tend to appear during delays, during pauses, during those stretches of time where the outside world seems quiet, stalled, or unresponsive. And that's what makes them unsettling, because no one teaches you how to interpret them. Friends tell you you're overthinking. Doctors tell you everything looks normal. Motivational voices tell you to push through and stay positive. But none of that explains why your inner world feels like it's rearranging itself, why certain people slowly drift away without conflict, why old desires lose their flavor, why things you once chased suddenly feel empty, even when you finally get them. It feels like you're standing between two versions of yourself, one you've outgrown, and one that hasn't fully arrived. This is usually when people panic. They try to fill the silence. They distract themselves with noise, work, scrolling, relationships, anything to avoid the feeling that something invisible is unfolding without their permission. But here's the mystery most people never consider. What if these sensations are not symptoms of confusion, but signals of alignment in progress? Across cultures and spiritual traditions, these moments were never dismissed as random. They were understood as a language, a subtle one, spoken not in words but in sensations, symbols, and timing. Dreams were messages, physical sensations were indicators, delays were thresholds, not obstacles. And the reason this language feels so disorienting today is simple. We were never taught how to listen to it. That strange fatigue? It often appears when an old identity is dissolving. Those recurring dreams? They tend to surface when the unconscious is preparing you for a shift your conscious mind would resist. That feeling of being out of sync with the world? It frequently shows up when your inner rhythm is changing faster than your external life. None of this feels comfortable. In fact, it often feels lonely because you can't fully explain it to anyone and you can't go back to who you were before it started. If you've ever felt this quiet separation, if you've ever sensed that life was pulling you inward while the world kept asking you to perform outwardly, if you've ever wondered why clarity seems to come only when everything else slows down, then you're not broken, and you're not imagining things. You're standing in a space most people rush past. And if this perspective feels familiar, not logically, but emotionally, subscribing isn't about content. It's about staying connected to a conversation your inner world has already started. Because the real question isn't whether these signs mean something. The real question is, what is being prepared inside you during the delays you're trying so hard to escape? There is a first sign that appears almost every time the universe begins working through delay. And it's so subtle that most people misunderstand it completely. It's not an external event. It's not a coincidence you can point to. It's not something others can easily see. The first sign is internal fragmentation. You begin to feel like parts of you are no longer synchronized. Your mind wants movement, but your body resists. Your habits continue, but they feel hollow. Your goals still exist on paper, yet emotionally they no longer pull you forward. This is the moment when people assume something is wrong. But ancient teachings describe this exact phase as the beginning of alignment, not its failure. In early mystical traditions, this stage was described as the loosening of the old shell. Not a collapse, a softening. A quiet, internal undoing. Think of a snake before it sheds its skin. It doesn't move faster. It doesn't hunt. It withdraws. Its vision becomes cloudy. Its sensitivity increases. Its instincts override its habits. From the outside, it looks vulnerable. From the inside, a new structure is forming. Human consciousness follows a similar law. When the universe delays you, it often means your old internal structure can no longer support where you're going next. So it begins to dissolve it, gently but thoroughly. This is why motivation disappears first. Not because you're lazy, but because motivation is tied to identity. And identity is being questioned. People in this phase often say things like, "I don't recognize myself lately. I don't know what I want anymore. I feel disconnected, but not depressed. I feel empty, but strangely aware." That emptiness is not absence, it's space. Ancient initiatory paths taught that no truth could enter a vessel that was already full. So the first step was always emptiness, created not by force, but by delay. You're not being punished by stagnation. You're being emptied of what no longer fits. This is why pushing forward during this phase feels exhausting. Why forcing decisions leads to regret. Why rushing clarity only deepens confusion. Because clarity doesn't arrive until the internal noise settles. This is also why isolation tends to follow. Not as abandonment, but as protection. When the inner structure is softening, external influence becomes dangerous. Other people's expectations, timelines, and opinions can solidify you into a shape you're meant to outgrow. So life quietly removes distractions. Conversations lose depth. Social energy drains faster. Certain people fade without conflict. And it hurts, because the ego interprets distance as rejection. But spiritually, this distance creates the silence needed for reorganization. This is the first hidden law of delay. Before expansion, there is disassembly. And disassembly always feels like loss, until you see what replaces it. If this resonates, if you recognize this internal fragmentation in yourself, gently tap the like button. Not as approval, but as acknowledgement. And subscribing isn't about numbers here. It's about entering a shared space where these experiences are spoken aloud instead of dismissed. Because here's the unsettling part most people aren't told. Once this process begins, it doesn't stop on command. And the next sign the universe reveals during delay is far more intense. Because it doesn't dissolve what you do. It confronts who you believe you are. There's a story I rarely tell. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's quiet. And quiet transformations are the hardest to explain. There was a period in my life when nothing collapsed outwardly. No crisis. No visible loss. From the outside, everything looked stable, even successful. But inside, something had gone completely still. I remember waking up every morning with a strange heaviness, not in my body, but behind my thoughts. The air felt thicker. Time moved differently. Conversations sounded distant, as if I were slightly underwater. I stopped feeling excited by things that used to define me. Achievements felt weightless. Plans felt borrowed. Even joy felt muted. At first, I fought it. I doubled my efforts. I stayed busy. I filled every silence with noise. Podcasts, schedules, conversations that skimmed the surface. I told myself this was just a phase. That clarity would return if I pushed hard enough. It didn't. Instead, the delays intensified. Emails stopped coming. Opportunities dissolved quietly. People I once spoke to daily drifted away without explanation. And then, the dreams began. Not nightmares. Something stranger. I kept dreaming of being in familiar places that felt wrong. Rooms rearranged. Doors where walls used to be. Voices calling my name without faces attached to them. I'd wake up with my heart racing, not from fear, but from recognition. Like something inside me was trying to speak in a language I didn't yet understand. The hardest part wasn't the isolation, it was the doubt. The voice that whispered, "Maybe you missed your moment. Maybe this is stagnation. Maybe you're regressing." But late one night, Sitting alone in a dimly lit room, something shifted. I stopped asking when things would move forward, and for the first time, I asked why everything had stopped. I noticed patterns I'd ignored before, how every delay coincided with an internal realization, how every loss created space I didn't know I needed, how every silence forced me to hear thoughts I'd spent years avoiding. I realized the delay wasn't empty, it was instructional. It was stripping me of identities I had outgrown, roles I played well, but no longer inhabited fully. It was dismantling versions of me that were functional, productive, and profoundly misaligned. The universe wasn't closing doors randomly. It was preventing me from walking through them as someone I was no longer meant to be. And once I stopped resisting, once I stopped demanding answers on my timeline, something subtle but powerful happened. My intuition sharpened. My dreams became clearer. I felt a calm certainty beneath the uncertainty. Not clarity about what was next, but trust in why I was where I was. That period didn't end with fireworks. It ended with a quiet knowing, a sense that I had crossed an invisible threshold, and that whatever came next would require a different version of me. If you've lived through something similar, a delay that felt personal, isolating, confusing, you're not alone in it. And if you're comfortable, I invite you to share your experience in the comments. A dream, a pause, a strange sign, a moment when life slowed you down without explanation. I read them. And some of them may find their way into future conversations here. And if this story resonated, subscribing isn't about following me. It's about staying connected to a space where these experiences are honored instead of dismissed. Because the delay that transformed me wasn't the most painful part. What came after? The moment I was forced to confront the version of myself I'd been protecting was far more unsettling. And that confrontation changes everything. The second great sign appears only after you stop fighting the delay. And this is where most people miss it. Because this sign doesn't arrive as a dramatic vision or a sudden miracle. It arrives as a change in how reality responds to you. At some point during prolonged waiting, something subtle shifts. You begin to notice that forcing outcomes no longer works at all. But strangely, listening does. You try to push, and doors feel heavy. You pause, and something aligns effortlessly. This is not coincidence. This is the universe recalibrating how you move through it. Ancient traditions described this moment as the transfer of authority. Not authority over others, authority over your own inner timing. Here's how this sign shows up in real life. You start feeling resistance before making decisions that once felt automatic. Your body reacts before your mind has reasons. A tightness, a pullback, a quiet inner no that doesn't argue. It simply is. At the same time, when something is aligned, the signal feels different. Not exciting, not urgent, but calm, grounded, certain. People often confuse this with fear or hesitation. But fear is loud. This is quiet. This sign is the awakening of somatic intuition. The body's ancient intelligence reasserting itself once the mind releases control. Why does this happen during delays? Because when external momentum disappears, the nervous system finally has space to recalibrate. Old survival patterns lose their grip. The body stops reacting to who you were required to be and starts responding to who you are becoming. This is why your tolerance changes. You can no longer tolerate. Conversations without depth, paths that feel misaligned, environments that drain you, urgency that isn't yours, and you don't need explanations anymore. Your system already knows. This is the second secret of delay. The pause re-teaches you how to listen. And once you regain that inner listening, you're meant to use it, not intellectually, but practically. Here is a simple technique you can apply immediately. It requires no belief system, no rituals, no tools, only honesty. Tonight or tomorrow, choose one unresolved decision in your life. Not the biggest one, just a real one. Sit quietly and bring the decision to mind. Do not analyze it. Do not list pros and cons. Instead, notice your body. Ask internally, if I move forward with this, what happens inside me? Pause. Do not look for thoughts. Look for sensations. Expansion or contraction. Ease or tightness. Warmth or heaviness. Then ask the opposite. If I don't move forward, if I wait, what happens inside me? Again, observe without judgment. The body does not lie, but it whispers. And delay sharpens your ability to hear that whisper. Practice this daily with small choices. What to say yes to. What to postpone. Who to engage with. When to rest. Over time, something remarkable happens. Life stops feeling random. Waiting stops feeling passive. And you begin to sense that the delay itself is guiding your movement, not blocking it. But this is only the surface. Because there is a deeper signal that emerges after intuition stabilizes, a sign so quiet that most people dismiss it as nothing. And yet, it marks the exact moment the universe begins rearranging reality around you instead of within you. Almost no one recognizes it when it appears, and once you do, there is no going back. If this resonates, if you want to continue walking this path with awareness instead of resistance, subscribe. Not as a habit, but as an alignment. Because the final sign doesn't ask for belief, it demands recognition. There is a final sign that appears only when the delay has finished its inner work. And this one is so quiet, so ordinary on the surface, that nearly everyone misses it. This sign does not feel mystical at first. It doesn't glow. It doesn't announce itself. It feels like nothing happening. And that is exactly why it is the most powerful signal of all. Ancient esoteric traditions, early Christian mystics, and even modern physics point to the same paradoxical truth. Creation does not begin with movement. It begins with stillness. Before light, there was silence. Before form, there was void. Before the word was spoken, there was listening. In the deepest delays, the universe is not waiting on circumstances. It is waiting on identity. The final sign appears when you stop asking, "Why isn't it happening yet?" and start feeling something far stranger. A calm detachment from outcomes. A loss of urgency, not from apathy, but from trust. A sense that whether things move or not, you will be okay. This is the moment the ego loosens its grip. And in ancient language, this state had a name, surrender. Not as weakness, but as alignment. In esoteric Christianity, this moment was symbolized by Christ in the tomb. Not the crucifixion, not the resurrection, the pause in between. 3 days of apparent nothingness. No miracles, no movement, no proof. Yet everything was changing. From the outside, it looked like absence. From the inside, it was preparation for a reality shift. Quantum physics mirrors this truth in its own language. Particles do not decide their position until they are observed. potential exists in a field of probabilities, suspended, undefined, until awareness collapses it into form. Your life behaves the same way. When you release attachment to how and when, your internal state becomes coherent. And coherence is what collapses potential into reality. This is why manifestation doesn't respond to desperation, why force repels flow, why control delays resolution. The universe does not reward effort alone. It responds to state of being, and delays refine that state. They strip urgency, they dissolve false identities, they exhaust the ego's strategies, until only presence remains. That presence is not passive, it is magnetic. This is why, after long delays, things often change suddenly, without warning, without struggle. A message arrives, a door opens effortlessly, a path appears where none existed. Not because you tried harder, but because you finally stopped interfering. If you've ever noticed that life begins moving after you give up forcing it, you've touched this truth. And if this resonates, take a second to like this video. Not as a favor, but as a way of anchoring this moment. This channel is built with intention, not algorithms, and every interaction strengthens this shared space of awareness. If you feel aligned, subscribing is simply a way of staying within a frequency that values depth over noise. Here is the unsettling realization most people never reach. The universe doesn't delay you until conditions are right. It delays you until you no longer need the outcome to validate who you are. And once that need dissolves, reality reorganizes itself around you. But this brings a final uncomfortable question, one that most teachings avoid, because it places responsibility exactly where people don't want it. If delays end only when identity changes, what part of you is still being asked to let go? What you've just walked through is not a theory. It's a pattern, one that has followed mystics, seekers, scientists, and ordinary people across centuries. The delays you hated were never empty. They were never random. They were never mistakes. They were invitations. Invitations to slow down when the world taught you to rush, to listen when noise became the norm, to let go of identities that once protected you, but now confined you. Every sign you recognized, the dreams, the fatigue, the silence, the inner resistance, the strange calm, was not the universe working against you. It was the universe working on you. Because awakening doesn't arrive like lightning. It arrives like dawn, quiet, gradual, unmistakable only in hindsight. You weren't delayed because you weren't ready. You were delayed because something deeper was being prepared. Something that couldn't be rushed without being broken. And here is the truth most people never hear. Not everyone receives these pauses. Some people move endlessly, distracted, busy, externally successful, yet never called inward, never asked to confront themselves, never invited to meet their deeper nature. But you were, which means your life is not just a sequence of events. It's a conversation between who you were and who you're becoming, between time and meaning, between effort and surrender. The delays shaped your perception. The silence refined your intuition. The waiting reintroduced you to yourself. And now, whether things move quickly or slowly from here, you are no longer the same person who first felt lost inside the pause. You listen differently. You choose differently. You trust something deeper than urgency. That is awakening, not as a label, but as a lived experience. If this journey spoke to you, don't let it end in silence. Leave a comment with your name and your city, not as a formality, but as a way of being seen. I read every comment, and in the next video, I'll be sharing greetings from this growing circle of awareness. If this video resonated, gently like it, not for the algorithm, but as a personal acknowledgement of the moment you recognized yourself in these words. And if you feel called, subscribe. Not because you need more content, but because this space exists for those who sense that life is more than what appears on the surface. Because the universe doesn't speak louder. It speaks truer. And once you've learned how to listen, even the silence begins to answer.